My daughter, Paige Annette, who passed away in November of 2017. What I really remember about her is how tiny and peaceful she looked when she was born and brought to us. And when it was time for her burial, it was probably the coldest day of the year. So I will never forget that.
Welcome to Still a Part of Us, a podcast where moms and dads share the story of their child who was stillborn or who died in infancy. I'm Lee Red, and on this episode, Adam is telling the story of his daughter, Paige, who was stillborn at 36 weeks due to a placental abruption and HELLP syndrome. As a word of caution to our listeners, this story contains emotional triggers of stillbirth and infant loss. Please keep yourself emotionally and mentally healthy and seek help if needed. Also be aware that these birth stories may differ from his or her partners, as these accounts are told from their own perspective through the lens of trauma, heartache, and the passage of time. Please respect our moms and dads who are brave and gracious to share their children with us.
So my wife and I have kind of a long fertility journey. You go through school and you hear about how, basically you sneeze and you get pregnant, right? You go through all those health classes, stay away from everything. If you touch a girl, they're going to get pregnant. For us, unfortunately, that was not the case. So we started almost 10 years ago at this point, trying to work on getting our family. And we originally were successful, naturally. And after about 6 weeks, my wife had her first miscarriage. So we went on trying for another year or two, again, with no results. And at that point, we kind of looked at each other and we're like, something just doesn't feel right. This isn't working. So we sought the help of a fertility specialist in our area. And after looking at everything with her, we ended up going through a couple of IUI cycles. And from that, after the third try, we got pregnant with our first son, AJ, who is roughly 6 years old now. So things have been great with him, and we looked at each other and said, okay, maybe it's time to bring on child number two. We had always felt that our family wanted two people. It was kind of like a good balance, at least so we thought. So we again went back down the journey. We went straight to the fertility clinic and said, this is what's going on. Let's go for it again. So we continued the IUI cycles, and I believe it was the second try that time that we ended up getting pregnant, only to again have a miscarriage about 8 weeks later, which actually, oddly enough, happened to be on the same day that my wife's aunt passed away. So it was a little bit of a rough period of time for our family. After we kind of, I don't want to say move past it, but after we were okay mentally and physically to try again, we said, all right, this is really what we want. We got to keep going. So we ended up going back to the clinic again and going through the same cycle over and over again, and eventually became pregnant with our daughter, Paige. She achieved pregnancy in the early part of 2017. So to back up to the first pregnancy, everything went pretty smoothly. Liza didn't experience any morning sickness. She didn't have a lot of pain or difficulty, up until you get to the third trimester when you can barely move. The delivery itself, it ended up being a C-section only because the baby's heart rate was dropping slightly, which may have been because of the cord, or they weren't 100% sure. But basically, the doctor said to her, "Look, we can kind of wait this out and keep having you move around and trying to adjust the position of the baby, with it likely ending in a C-section anyway, or we can just go forward and do it now." So she said, "You know what? We've waited this long. Let's not risk it. Let's just go through with it and be done." So that night, our son AJ was born. His name's Anthony, but we call him AJ. So now, moving forward to her latest pregnancy with our daughter Paige, things were not as smooth as the first time. So she still didn't experience the morning sickness, but as time went on, she was getting these random pains and just things that she hadn't experienced when she went through the first time. She ended up going and getting looked at probably around 20 weeks. there were some minor details, like a little bit of protein in her urine, and some of the other things that she just didn't deal with that we kind of knew might have been signs for concern, but the doctors kept reassuring us that everything was fine, and we kept moving on. That kind of continued out through the second trimester and into the third. And then it ultimately got to a point where it was about a week before Paige's birth that she didn't feel right. So we went into the doctor, they took her blood pressure. It was elevated for her, but not outside of the charts, the normal chart range. So they kind of just said, you know what, come back in a couple days, we'll check it again, make sure everything's fine. The heartbeat was fine. Went back in a few days, and as they expected, everything was fine. Blood pressure was back down to normal. So a few days later, we ended up going on a trip out of state, just a car ride, about a 2-hour trip, to celebrate her uncle's birthday at my in-laws' house. And while we were there, she really didn't feel good the whole day. So at this point, she was about 36 weeks pregnant. It got to a point later on in the night where her sister basically looked at her and said, look, you have 10 minutes. If you don't feel better, call your doctor, or I'm calling. So it got to the 10 minutes. She wasn't feeling any better. She ended up calling her doctor, which was a state away and about a 2-hour drive away. So after some discussion with him, he ultimately said, you know what, there's too many maybes going on here. And he said, it's probably best if you just go into the local hospital, just get reassured everything's okay. And if not, at least you'll be in a place where they can help. So at that point, my sister-in-law and I packed up the car. We took my wife with us. It was about a 45-minute drive down to the hospital.
Now, was this sort of like a big city hospital or more rural?
No, so this is so they kind of live in the woods a little bit. So this was kind of a smaller hospital. The larger hospital was another half hour or so away. But we kind of, driving in, we just kind of expected, you know what, maybe this is just the day that our daughter comes. We kind of just, it's not ideal. We're out of state, but at least we're at our family's house, and they have people to take care of our son, and while it's not exactly what we planned on, it would be okay.
Yeah.
So we show up to the hospital. Everybody's kind of laughing and joking. Nobody's expecting anything bad going on. She gets checked in. They bring her into a room in the ER, and kind of as they're getting ready to start, inspecting and seeing, like using the machine to start looking at the heartbeat and all that. Yeah. My wife just kind of went completely white, and we're looking at her and we're like, you okay? You don't seem all right. And she ended up passing out. Thankfully, there were a couple nurses in the room as it happened, and then really, like the next thing there was probably 15 or 20 nurses and doctors in the area kind of tending to her. It all happened so fast that my sister-in-law and I were kind of looking at each other like, what just happened? So this is going on, and then they also have the machine trying to find the heartbeat. And we're sitting there, and it seemed like hours were going by that they're going around looking for it. I think at that point we both kind of knew, like, that was it. There was no heartbeat, but we couldn't, or didn't, I should say, focus on it then because we were so concerned about her sister and my wife. So as they eventually stabilized her, they brought us up to the maternity wing. Again, did an exam, and I will never forget the words the doctor said. He looked right at her and said, I'm very sorry, but there's no heartbeat. So, of course, at that point, it was, I almost want to say for me, I was in shock because I'm still kind of focused on my wife, who they're very concerned about. And now you're just giving us the news that, this doesn't happen. You're at 36 weeks. How does this, and of course, as we were talking about prior, this isn't talked about a lot, and you don't hear of this happening. So, you go to the hospital and you deliver a baby. That's just how it goes. But unfortunately for us, that's not what happened. So as the night went on, of course we had to have the baby taken out. So they did that by a C-section because and it wasn't quick because they had to wait for her levels to stabilize before they could actually go in and do a surgery. So she had the surgery. Our daughter was born at 2:48, November 12th of 2017. And I think it was about 3 or 4 hours later that my wife finally woke up. But when she did, she couldn't see, and we thought it was just from one of the medications. So they were all pretty confident that that would kind of work itself out. And as the hours went on, and as we eventually got moved to another to the intensive care unit in the hospital, it really wasn't improving for her, and her other levels really weren't all that great either. So there was definitely some concern over whether even my wife was going to make it at that point. So as you can imagine, dealing with the loss of the child kind of took a back seat. So at that point, it still didn't even really process in my head. I did take a break out at one point to kind of just call my parents who were back home, just to let them know what was going on. And I mean, it definitely broke their hearts hearing the news from us. As parents, they're sitting there saying, my kid's 2 hours away and I can't do anything to comfort him immediately. And I mean, yeah, they did get right in the car, but it takes time. So we ended up staying at the hospital another probably 6 or 7 hours before. I'm sorry, even I'm losing track of time. It was almost a day that we stayed in the intensive care unit before they finally said, we think we need to send you to a hospital that's a little more equipped to deal with what's going on. So we got sent over to the larger hospital at that point.
Now, at this point, do you know what is going on with your wife? Or is it still like, it could be the drugs?
They didn't.
Could be.
Yeah, they didn't know at the time, and I think we weren't overly thrilled with the care that we had there. They didn't mesh well with us is ultimately what it was. So in a way, we were kind of happy that we were being transferred over because the other hospital was much more reputable. And, we agreed with them that it was better equipped to handle the situation. The concern was our baby is still in the first hospital.
Yeah.
So as it turns out, we were able to spend a few minutes with her before we got transferred. So they brought her up. We were able to hold her, cry with her, talk to her, all that. But keep in mind, my wife still couldn't see, so she couldn't even see the face of her own daughter before we had to give her back to the staff. So we did end up getting transferred over to the second hospital, and in the ER there, it was determined that she ended up having preeclampsia, which even more so, it was called HELLP syndrome, which is a more severe version of preeclampsia. And that's why all of this happened. It sounds like her placenta, there was abruption of placenta, 75%, which is what may have caused the death. So essentially, she bled to death. At least that's what we were told. We didn't end up doing an autopsy. We didn't want them to start poking and prodding her. We just wanted her to be at peace. So in the second hospital, she spent a day down in the ER. They eventually transferred her up to maternity again, where we spent another 5 days. The kind of cool part, looking back now, is that they have these things called cuddle cots. And the nurse that was working in this hospital was so kind of invested in our story at that point that she did everything in her power to get our baby transferred over from the first hospital to the second. So we ended up getting to spend a good 5 or 6 days with her before we had to say our final goodbyes to her. Well, so that was, I mean, looking back, that was very special. We got to sing to her, hold her, talk to her. And I know, unfortunately, that's not something all couples are able to participate in. So
that is something very special. So
it is. Yeah, we had never even heard of these things. And unfortunately, it sounds like they're not spread out very much in the hospitals. There's maybe one or two in some hospitals, not in others. So in that case, we were definitely fortunate. So going forward, as my wife was eventually released from the hospital, she started to regain a little sight back, but not a lot. It turns out that her retina actually detached. I'm
Oh,
sorry, it kind of, I'm trying to think of how they explained it to us, but it essentially there was enough fluid buildup behind it that it kind of separated itself, and what they had to wait for was for the fluid to kind of drain and then see if the retina would come back to where it was. So she's thankfully at this point back, I would say maybe 90% to normal, but she still has trouble with some things. So
so would you
it was
say
just
it's
an added complication.
would you
So
say it's sort of like a blister, like the fluid detaches
so
it?
the fluid builds up and it kind of just completely spreads apart.
Ah,
Essentially, the piece of your eye that sees, and as it comes back, we've seen multiple eye specialists at this point, and as it comes back, it's just a matter of do the pieces line back up the way they did, or are they slightly altered?
mm,
So in her case, it's slightly altered, but it's thankfully she's able to do normal things and drive and all that kind of stuff. So it's more of a pain and a painful reminder to
yeah.
her of what happened. But at least she's able to function okay. So
Oh. Well, thank you for
yeah,
clarifying that, I guess.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So from that point, that's we had to then start with all the burial services, funeral arrangements. At 30 something years old, that's something we never thought we would have to be doing for a kid of ours, essentially. And and this is, I was always one that wanted boys. It's just, I'm a sports fan. I love I thought my son would want to grow up playing sports, and I just felt like there'd be a better bond. But once we found out it was a girl, I was completely hooked and completely attached. So it really got to me that we thought we were done with our family, and that was it. We just wanted two and done. Unfortunately, that's not the way it had worked out for us. So, but yeah, we did go ahead and schedule the funeral arrangements, and like I said in the intro, it was freezing that day. We had an incredible showing from our friends and family, and that's really what got us. Or what really helped us through the majority of this. I mean, we had coworkers and the line was out the door of people coming in to pay their respects, which meant the world to us. But it was definitely a tough and emotional day to go through that. You see the little tiny casket with your daughter in it. We did not have it open. We did not have an open casket because I feel like that image would have been engraved in our brains forever. And I didn't want to remember her like that, so we chose not to do that. But yeah.
With the funeral arrangements, when we buried our son, we actually
Hmm.
bought plots for my wife and I.
We did.
And
Yep.
like you were saying, like here you are, 30 something years old and trying to pick out
Hmm.
headstones and
Yeah.
stuff that will last forever and that you're going to hopefully in 40, 50, 60 years be buried underneath yourself.
Yeah,
And
so we ended up doing the same thing as you. It sounds like we bought plots for us, we bought for our son. And we just said, what, we need to ensure that we're going to be together
yeah.
when all is said and done. So again, I didn't know the first thing about plots, and
No.
so it was an eye opener for us and a little too much of a reality for us, but
Yeah,
it's something we felt at that point we had to do. So
it's something for old people to figure out. It's not for
yep,
us.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah. But
Yep.
how close is the cemetery to you guys now?
So the cemetery is about 15 minutes away, so it's really convenient. We were concerned over picking a location because what if we move, or what
Yeah.
if but we really said, what, this is where we are. We have no plans of going anywhere. We didn't want to have her cremated or anything like that, so we just said, what, a lot of my family is already there. Let's pick out our own little plot, kind of a little away from the rest of
Yeah.
the relatives, but a nice little area, and we tend to visit quite often. So every birthday at this point, which we've gone through two since, we'll go as a family. We'll kind of sit there. We'll have cupcakes and whatnot. Just try and make it a little special. As the weather gets nicer, we'll go by and have lunch once in a while. So we kind of do what we can to make sure that we never forget, and we can be a part of her life too.
Well, that's special. Anything else you'd like to talk about after the funeral? How was getting over? That's a terrible way to how.
Hmm.
My little sister, she says you never move on, you just move forward.
Yeah,
How
and I
has
completely agree.
yeah
Yeah.
how is moving forward?
So this was a challenge. So I had thankfully a pretty easy, I guess I'll call it, childhood. I never really had major tragedies that happened. I never really had to go through anything too difficult. My wife had much more of, I guess, what I would call a normal childhood, where she had dealt with tragedies and things like that. So I think she was a little more equipped to deal with it. For me, I was okay initially. Um, and then about a month after, one of our family dogs passed away from a heart attack, and that's at 5 years old. That was what really ended up pushing me over the edge, I would say. Um, so we had talked beforehand about finding help and talking to therapists. Like I said before, thankfully our friends and family were amazing and they were very good supports, but none of them could relate really to what we were going through. So once the next month rolled around and I kind of hit rock bottom, I knew I needed to get some help. I couldn't get out of a chair. I was severely depressed, and I didn't even know what that meant at the time. So my wife and I both ended up going to therapy. We had our individual therapists. It got to a point where I had to go to a group therapy program just to kind of help snap myself out of it. So it definitely changed our lives a lot going forward. I 2+ years later am still in therapy, as is she. It's been a huge help to us. Just kind of working through our own personal issues as well as dealing with the loss. So it's something that anybody that's gone through something like this, I would highly recommend. I think talking about your child, um, being open and honest, just having conversations about them is so helpful. Um, I would also say that for me, I think it just helps you keep their memory alive. They're still your child,
Yeah, yeah.
whether they're here or not, and they deserve to be talked about. They're a part of your life. They're just not here with you physically. So
And I too want to echo your advice. Therapy, seeing a counselor. I too was I still battle with some of my depression because of the loss of my
yes.
son, and one of the biggest helps was I would just wake up from dreams just so mad and so just full of anger.
Hmm.
And when I told my therapist about it, she was like, "Well, let's break it down. Like, are you mad at anybody in particular?" And in all reality, all the anger and the hate that I was building up, she was like, "You can feel those, and you don't have to put it on anybody. You can have those
Right.
feelings, and then just release it." And that was the biggest help I ever got, because it
Yes.
was one of those, like, I feel these primal feelings, and I don't have anywhere to release them, so I just put it on myself, and I hate myself.
Hmm.
Ugh.
Yep.
And then also,
Yep.
and just that one little, you don't have to put those feelings on anything. Just let it go. And I was just like, oh yeah, I guess I can just let it go. So
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I
in
love,
my case, I was gonna say in my case, I was one who always internalized everything.
yeah,
So for me, once I started getting stuff out, things just poured out at that
yeah,
point, and you'd be surprised how much better you feel when you get all that stuff out.
yeah.
So it
It,
was it was a huge relief for me, and like I said, I was kind of out of commission for I don't know 4 or 5 months afterwards, and thankfully my wife was able to pick up the slack and take care of our son and all that, but it was an area I had never been before. So I'm happy to say at this point I'm much better and feeling good. And we've actually since gone on and had a daughter of our own that's here with
congratulations.
us.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And she just quickly on that, we decided ultimately that my wife couldn't carry again. That was through some medical advice as well. So much to our shock, a very close friend of ours actually offered to carry for us if we were willing. So after really thinking about it for some time, we finally said, you know what, let's just try it. Um, it meant that much to us to have our family complete. And thankfully, of course, that process had its challenges too, but thankfully everything went smoothly. And at this point, we have our family, so
Well,
it feels good.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you would like to say in regards to the birth of Paige, or the burial of
Um,
Paige, or the memory coming after?
I think really what I would just say is, as I kind of mentioned before, talking about your past child is, I think, the most important thing. She may not be here physically, but we still kind of feel like she is at times. Our new daughter, she'll kind of look in the corner room and just start smiling, and we're kind of like, you know what, maybe she's smiling at her. We don't know, but she's just looking in the corner of the nursery. And it's little things like that that kind of make us smirk a little bit, and of course, make us a little sad at the same time. But it changed our lives forever. We of course have regrets. We of course partially blame ourselves for not paying attention to some of the signs. And granted, what do we know? But we often wonder, what if we did this or whatnot. But at the end of the day, we did the best that we could, and we were able to move forward, thankfully. And she will always be a part of our lives.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Adam.
Yeah. Thanks.
Many thanks to Adam for coming onto the podcast and being willing to talk about his daughter and the harrowing experience he had with the death and near loss of his own wife. Thank you, Adam, for coming and sharing and opening up with us. Head over to our website, stillapartofus.com. There you could find the show notes, including a full transcript of this interview and any resources that were mentioned. There you could sign up for a short and helpful email newsletter. You can also learn how you could become a patron and support the work it takes to produce this show. And lastly, there you can find out how to get in touch with us if you'd like to share your child's story on the show. The show was produced and edited by Winter and Lee Red. Thanks to Josh Woodward for letting us use his song, She Dreams in Blue. You could find him at joshwoodward.com. Lastly, subscribe to this podcast and share it with a friend that might need it, and tell them to subscribe. Why? Because people need to know that even though our children are no longer with us, they are still a part of us. I am so clever that sometimes I don't understand a single word that I am saying. Oscar Wilde.